welcome everyone to this new webinar of the Zero-Waste Europe Live series. We have people joining. We're already 20, 21, 22 people. We'll just take a couple of more minutes to have people joining. As a quick introduction, already as a host, my name is Esrakat. I'm the Network and Development Coordinator at Zero-Waste Europe. I'll be your steward for this journey in plastic waste prevention in action. So we still have a few people joining, and we'll try to start on time. Yes, so the only way to finish on time is to start on time. So we still have people joining. We'll let them come. So we're really happy to host this new webinar. So once a month, Zero-Waste Europe, we coordinate a new webinar on a hot topic. When last year we asked to our followers and people who were signing up to our newsletter, what would be the top 5 topics you would like to discuss about. Plastic waste was definitely very high among the topics. And one of the key questions that we're going to address today, it's not only to understand the new plastic waste legislation, really what it means, what does it have inside, but then to move from the legislation to the implementation. And the idea is really to go to the action part of it. So how can we really reduce plastic packaging in the city? What are the best practices to promote alternatives to single-use packaging? And actually, what are the impacts at the city level? To address this list of questions, we'll be happy we are very happy to have a great panel. Before I introduce the panelists, I would like to invite all the participants to use the chat box. So you have 2 tools for this webinar. You have on one side the chat box, and I invite you, and my colleague Agnese had also mentioned it. I invite you to introduce you, say who you are, your city, your country, and then what you're doing. It also helps understanding a bit more who are participating in this webinar. And the second tool that I invite you to use is the Q&A. So we'll have presentations. We'll have 10-15 minutes per presentation with our 3 speakers, and we'll have time to dig into the practical aspects. So you are very welcome to ask both clarification questions or questions related to challenges you may face. So without further delay, just to give you an overview of our amazing panel today, we have with us Larissa Copello, who is a colleague of mine. She's the Zero Waste Consumption and Production Campaigner at Zero-Waste Europe. We have also Janet Murat, who is the founder at Reusable. And we have Clarissa Morawski, who is the Managing Director at Reloop. So each of our speakers is going to guide us through this practical policy implementation dimension of the plastic waste prevention in action. So our first speaker is Larissa. Larissa has a background in law, and she worked as a legal consultant on environment, health, and safety policies. And today she leads on the consumption production policies at Zero-Waste Europe. So Larissa, can you guide us in this new plastic legislation and help us understand actually what can be done at different levels to reduce this plastic footprint?
Hello everyone, thanks Ezra for introducing me. So yeah, my presentation will be on the single-use plastic directive mostly. Just gonna share my screen. Hope everyone can see it.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to introduce on the new EU plastic legislation, which is the single-use plastic directive, which was agreed last year, in the end of last year, and I have been following since it has proposed until it reached the agreement. But first, just a bit background of why we are here talking about plastic waste prevention. I think you all know that plastic is one of the fastest growing pollutants in the world. And I think you all have heard that global production and consumption of plastics have increased 20 times over within the past 50 years. And in Europe, around 26 million tons of plastic is generated every year. And from that, only 30% of the waste is collected or recycled. And from this amount, some 40% is exported to third countries to be treated or recycled, and where even different standards can apply, and we don't really know if it's really recycled or treated. So we can conclude that 70% of all plastic ever produced in Europe is waste, and 40% is incinerated in 30% landfilled. And as you can see in this little picture here on the side, most application is for packaging, around 60%, and they are not cannot be recycled because of the chemicals and materials, different polymers they use, and mostly single-use item. So because of the growing public and political awareness on the topic, for instance, all the researches, the new studies on the impact of plastics coming on board, the EU politicians were kind of pushed to do something about it. And also there were some surveys in the EU with citizens, and it has shown that 84% of EU citizens were worried about plastic pollution and want a solution. So on 2015, there was the Circular Economy Action Plan adopted by the European Commission, and which proposed around 54 actions regarding circular economy, ranging from changing some legislation, doing more researches, solutions and innovations. And one thing was to write a strategy in the EU dedicated only for plastic because of the urgency in addressing the plastic pollution crisis. So the EU plastic strategy was adopted in 2018, in January 2018. And within this strategy there was a commitment to develop a legislation to reduce single-use plastics. So that is the so-called single-use plastic directive. And it was proposed in May last year, and in less than 1 year, as you can see, it was already agreed by December last year. So it was really like a record in time-wise for the EU decision process making, because usually it takes up to 2 years from a proposal to reach an agreement in a legislation. And this directive was dedicated to reduce marine litter plastic pollution. So I'm just going to pass to the next slides. As you can see, there was some studies and research on the most commonly single-use plastic items found in EU beaches. So more than 80% was plastic, and 50% was single-use plastic. And they rank these items according to the items that were most founded. So you can see first drink bottles, caps, and lids, second cigarette butts, and so on. So the directive was really aimed to address these items and specific marine litter. Here more details. I'm going a bit more details of the directive. So the directive divide the products they found in 3 categories. So one of the category was the items that have already readily alternatives available. So for instance, plastic straw, cutlery, plates, beverage stirrers, balance sticks, all these items, they establish market restrictions, so ban. So these items will be banned, have to be banned by 2021, mid of 2021, more or less. For the other items where there are not readily available alternatives according to the EU, such as food containers and cups, they established significant reduction in consumption of these products, which has to be reached within 6 years. from some other items that were already addressed by EU legislation somehow, they straightened this. The requirements. For instance, plastic bottles, beverage bottles. There is a 90% separate collection target for bottles to up to 3 liters. It has to be reached by 2029. For some other products, there was established some labeling requirements. For instance, tobacco products, sanitary items, wipes and cups as well, informing people of the negative environment impact of the disposal of these items. And for most of items, they establish external producer responsibility schemes, including coverage of awareness raising, waste management, and cleanup costs. Yeah. So this directive has to be transposed within 2 years when it is published in the official diary. Now we are waiting, the text was already agreed by the end of next year. Now it's just waiting some administrative procedures to be rubber stamped by the European Parliament and the Council, which will be more or less around end of March, beginning of April, and it will be published, we expect to be published around mid-year, and after be published, it enters in force 20 days, within 20 days. So yeah, so after that, national governments have 2 years to transpose all these requirements in their national legislation. So would be more or less by mid 2021. So it's important to highlight this step, that this directive is focused on reducing the impact of certain single-use plastic in the environment to avoid leakage pollution, rather than reduce the actual plastic items themselves. So although it established consumption reduction measures for a couple of items, such as food containers and cups, it does not aim at reducing overall plastic production or consumption. Therefore, there's still a lot of things to do in order to tackle plastic pollution at source. And we see this directive as the first step. And we should keep working beyond that to tackle, to address plastic waste at source. And there are a lot of things that can be done by different levels and different actors, government, business, communities, to reduce plastic footprint use. For instance, the EU should continue working on the plastic strategy, that there is many measures there to address, for instance, restrict microplastic, including primary and secondary source of microplastics, to ensure toxic-free actions, toxic-free resources streams, and support as well the growing of alternative solutions, such as other materials, less polymers. The national governments during the transposition, they should and they can go beyond the directive. For instance, the directive does not establish targets for the consumption reduction of cups and food containers, and they can establish targets and can go really ambitious on these targets, or they can even ban these items if they want. So there are a lot of things they can do. Also, the recycle content, the directive established that that has to be a minimum of 30% recycled content for plastic bottles by 2030. So they can even establish a higher target than that, as 30% is still low. Regarding business, they are encouraged to rethink their business models and to start as soon as possible adapting their production process towards a more sustainable and circular way. For instance, regarding packaging, they have realized that what consumers want is the product themselves, not the packaging. So they can think about new systems, new ways to deliver their products, such as reusable or even packaging free. And on citizen local initiatives, there are many things that can be done on supporting packaging free stores, encourage cup and food container local reuse schemes, put in place water refill points and the cities. So yeah, the main objective is to continue work on plastic waste prevention and beyond single-use plastic, because we see how much this directive as the first step, and there's still a lot to do to tackle plastic pollution. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you very much, Larissa, for this introduction and presentation of the new directive. There are a couple of clarification questions from our participants. So you've mentioned actually the significant reductions, and the question is it quantified? Is it any like minimum target? What do we really ask with these significant reductions?
So yeah, this was one thing that we fight on the process, because this significant reduction does not mean, and it is not quantitative, we cannot measure it. But as there was no official data, they didn't want, and the EU, no official data for cups and food containers, they didn't want to establish targets, so they let them to national governments to do it. So national governments have to have this data by 2022 to reduce these items by 2026. So yeah, they have still some couple of 1.5 years or a couple of years, yeah, to collect this information. But yeah, on the directive, the EU they didn't want to establish one for the EU because of the lack of data on this.
Okay. And what you were saying is that in any case, the member states are invited to be ambitious, and as you said, they could even ban some of the products.
Yes.
There's another question, and I feel there's a lot of fear with the fact that the directive is going to change. So someone is asking, is it possible that the text of the directive will be changed before publication?
No. It's definitely not going to change. It's just the rubber stamp is just administrative thing, and there was a lot of now to reach these agreements between the EU Commission, Parliament, and the Council was already a lot of work, and they're not gonna touch it. No, I don't think so. It's gonna stay like that.
Yeah. I think you briefly touched on this aspect, but you know, sometimes we hear that the directive is not ambitious enough, and being on the other side, being from the people, the lobby side, what's your feeling with this directive, or in a way the hope?
Well, it was a huge step. I think it's the part of saying it's not ambitious enough. Well, it's just because we always want more, and as we saw the opportunity to address so many things regarding these items, of course we try to push for more and more all the time. But I think it's always part of our job as well. Someone has to do it. So, but I think it's definitely a good achievement, a great achievement. And yeah, as I said, it's just some items, but it's still it will have a huge impact, because as you saw, these items are the ones that most found in beaches and marine in the environment. So it's gonna be it's definitely really important.
I'm taking a last clarification question, and then we'll move on to Larissa. So you mentioned the cleanup. The cleanup efforts cost to be covered. Can you share a bit more insight about that specific aspect?
Yes, so I think it's the first time that APR will include cleanup costs, because some APR schemes does not cover cleanup costs, only waste management. So it has to be. I know it will be not easy to define the cost for this cleanup. I think the EU was already working on that, do some researches and studies of how much producers have to contribute for this cleanup. We're going to still follow this closely with the EU to make sure the producers pay the right price and not only to pay all the not only what municipalities will spend, for instance, but all the costs regarding citizens mobilizations for cleanup, everything. But it's a good achievement that is included in the APR schemes, because will be really high, I think, these costs, and will encourage producers to redesign their products for circularity.
Thank you very much, Larissa. I invite you to stop sharing your screen.
Sure.
I'm keeping some of the questions that I think are interesting for the different speaker, and I'm happy to move on to Clarissa Morawski, who's the managing director at Reloop. So Reloop is a European association of industry, NGOs, and cities that collectively push for the circular economy policy and implementation. So Clarissa has massive experience, 20 years of experience in waste minimization policy and operations, with a certain expertise on EPR, among others. So something that we wanted Clarissa to share with us, we know now we have this directive, but for municipalities and NGOs, what we should be focusing on to get the right implementation. And I think Clarissa has summarized this in the 10 things that which will lead to the great results. So Clarissa, sorry, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay? Awesome.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me. I feel privileged to be with this group of other women to talk about waste reduction. I don't want to hold back. I've got a little stop clock here. I'm going to get it started. So when you approached me, you said, okay, Clarissa, now we have all of this fantastic legislation out of the EU. And I would add to what Larissa was saying that it is extremely ambitious. Amazingly so. In fact, even more ambitious in some ways than what was originally proposed, and that's very positive. So I think it's all going in the right direction. So then the question really is, as the NGO and the local authorities or local groups or local communities, what should they be thinking about in order to get the best out of this enabling legislation? So I thought a little bit about it, and I came up with a list of 10 because I know everybody likes lists these days, as far as I understand from social media. So when I think about circular economy, there are 5 issues that we focus on. And before I move on to my presentation, just quickly, Reloop works on 5 specific issues, and it comes from being in Brussels for 2 years and trying to figure out where there was a need for some support. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in my list of 10 touches on these issues, but effectively it's about design, so ensuring minimum recycled content mandates legislated by law, not relying on volunteer commitments from companies. We are very much trying to push for expanded reusable packaging at all levels: consumer packaging, transport packaging, industrial packaging. We are forever a founding principle of the organization is how we calculate things. So we've been very active on recycling calculation method, which is part of the new legislation, and we will continue on calculation and monitoring. We obviously are experts in deposit return system. That's sort of goes back 25 years for me. And finally, probably the most challenging is how can we really increase collection and sorting to the high levels that we're hoping for to meet the targets and beyond. So here is my top 10 list, and I'm going to walk you through it, and then we can have a discussion about it after. So the first one I would say is one of the most important things that we all need to think about as we move into the future, and that's to get the organics out. Suffice to say that our CO2 problem is very much a part of that is that we're not properly managing our organics and they're ending up in landfills. But of course, the other 2 pieces is that getting organics out in a fairly clean state and creating compost has unbelievable benefits, including carbon mitigation benefits. So we really need to focus on the residents. We need to focus on home composting, multi-residential on-site solutions when you think in terms of apartment buildings, even some hub and spoke options where you can form some collection systems and then bring them to larger operations that can manage the amount of food waste that we see sometimes in urban centers. A real need, I think, to work with local business and participate, to get those local businesses participating in separate food collection systems. The accent you're hearing is not American. I'm a Canadian, and most of my adult life has been spent on waste reduction issues in Canada. And one of the things that I'm so proud of is that the city of Toronto, over 10 years ago, Toronto is like almost 5 million people, and lots of high-rise buildings, recognized the need to get the organics out. And the city did a very comprehensive action plan to work with businesses to get them to separate their green waste. And I think it's a really telling story, because we're often a bit nervous to try to introduce comprehensive organic programs into cities, but it's been done by many, and we should look at those best case examples and copy them. The next of the top 10 is pay as you throw. Again, Canada has been real leaders on this issue, which is effectively, when we say pay as you throw, it means incorporating strategies for both municipal and local businesses to make garbage either more expensive than recycling, less convenient than recycling, and less frequent than recycling. So basically what we're trying to do with a variety of strategies, including pay as you throw, where you have to pay for the garbage that you throw out, is to make throwing stuff away less desirable. The hope is that you will divert more and potentially change the way in which you consume less, because ultimately it's going to be a hassle. You might have to store it for a length of time, and it's potentially going to be more expensive. And another great example, again from Toronto, here you have this mega city, and they collect garbage once every 2 weeks. But they separate their wet waste so people don't have a problem with it, because their garbage, which sits around for 2 weeks, is dry and it doesn't stink. And the program actually works extremely well. So that would be my number 2 proposal. Number 3 is to always consider the power of procurement. And as municipalities, there is a lot of power to enact bylaws on multi-residential units to ensure that they provide access and easy participation to their multi-residential tenants, so that they can properly and conveniently source separate. The same goes for any public buildings that a municipality has control over in terms of waste management, maybe airports, certainly schools, etc. And they can also support them with preferential procurement, where highly recyclable packaging and recycled content packaging could be preferred in all of the public entities that distribute food, or cafeterias, etc. And finally, and this actually could have a big demand or impact, is demanding minimum recycled content in things like recycling bins and recycling boxes and blue bags, and all of these tools that municipalities offer people to source separate. Those are wonderful plastic bins that could have a lot of recycled content and effectively support the demand for those recyclable materials. So always a look on power of the procurement. Next is on dependable data. I can't stress enough how important it is now that we're going to have to look at costs of recycling and look at litter composition analyses and all of these things. Such an important part of that is the municipality or the local community. So align with national authorities and expert groups like Zero Waste to ensure that the systems that are put in place to gather data are consistent. And when I say consistent, I mean definitions, procedures, categorization, and all these things. It's so critically important that they're all consistent, so we get a really solid picture of where we're at if we've made improvement, and where are those locations where there are weaknesses. In this regard, the ACR Plus, which is the Association of Cities for Recycling, has some excellent data gathering systems that are web-based, that are been developed over years. And as a local authority, I'd highly recommend that you go there if you aren't already there to be reporting your data. And one of the most important things, as we now have redefined recycling and we only want to measure what is recyclable, the onus is on municipalities that contract sorting centers to demand, as part of the contract, that they provide, those sorting centers provide mass balance information in terms of what comes in and what goes out, be it sent off to recycling markets, but as well what's sent on to incineration and what's not sent on to landfills, so that we have a very clear understanding of the mass balance of the various sorting centers, and even potentially to go downstream and to say to your sorting facility, we want information as to where the sorted recyclables are being sold and to whom they're being sold. And there are arguments against this in terms of proprietary information, but I think it's pretty safe to say that a municipality has quite a bit of power when they're procuring services from the private sector. And finally, wherever possible, to make the data public. We're constantly comparing to make sure that what we get reported to us makes sense, and we're trying to double check all the time, and having publicly available data is a critical piece to that. The next one is EPR, and I call it support the transition. Currently, municipal and local authorities are delivering a lot of the programs, and over time, with the support of this legislation, effectively what's going to happen is the private sector is going to take over that responsibility. And that can be really problematic, especially because the private sector always wants to save money and only do as much as they possibly have to do depending on the target. So what's really important is not to prevent the industry from taking on greater responsibility, just support that initiative, but set the standard high, at least as high as it is now, if not higher, and don't allow the producers to downgrade the program in terms of the scope, the service, etc. So we need to demand minimum frequency in terms of collection, quality standards, convenience, no back-end costs, and I'm talking about everything here. Don't charge people when they want to drop off tires in a responsible way. Make sure if you're going to charge them, you charge it in the price of the tire, so that we don't want any penalties, financial penalties, which might disincentivize people from doing the right thing. And of course, independent monitoring is critical when we have EPR systems, because we cannot simply rely on the producers and what they're reporting to us. We absolutely have to have our own stream of data so we can, again, cross-check that. I'm almost done here, Ezra. The next one would be to support deposit return systems. We have seen a lot of development with deposit return systems, especially now that there's a 90% target on plastic beverages. All I would say is support your national governments in their effort to regulate deposit systems nationally. Do not block their efforts for fear that you're going to lose money. We have done a lot of work on this, and and the link is here. Municipalities stand to gain financially when you look at the full net impact. And there's a fact sheet here which shows you 27 studies that come to the same conclusion. So please support, don't block these efforts. And also consider deposit as a model for other hard to collect items that we might have in the system. Finally, the last couple of slides, supporting the bans. There are bans, as outlined to you earlier. Use the powers within local government to support these bans, especially at a retail level. Communicate the bans through your existing communications to support the national efforts. Offer options for better local alternatives. It's really important that the people that are selling these products now have an understanding that they're not allowed to sell them and that there are options. And my final one is a bit aggressive, but it works, is to set up a snitch line, a phone or a communications link, to allow people to report where local retailers or restaurants, fast food companies are selling some of the banned products. It's a very effective way to support the bans. Reuse, which our next speaker is going to talk more about. On municipal, there should be lots of support for both municipal reuse centers and also private sector reuse centers. Again, procurement has to always prefer reuse in most cases, and those municipalities have the opportunity to engage new pooling systems for reusable packaging, coffee shops, restaurants, food courts, and retailers, a really key component. Training is always important. Local authorities, unfortunately, have to take on that burden. The training to the public is sort of obvious, but also to all of the small businesses in the community, so they store, separate properly. They institute waste management. They do auditing, which they should always be doing waste audits. Keep training, make training part of the program, and never stop. And the final is to use the network. Zero Waste Europe is a fantastic network, as is the European Environmental Bureau. Consider these partnerships in peer-to-peer field trips. There is money available to exchange this information and share your experience with these networks, and please share it with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clarissa. Thank you for giving this 10 things that will lead to the results. I just had a question for you, clarification question, in all the things that has happened so far. You mentioned to start with the organics, and when it comes to the plastics, if you were in touch with a municipality that would say, okay, we have this new legislation, I'm doing kind of okay, but what should I do specifically on plastic waste prevention? What would be the first steps that you would advise, knowing all the tools that are out there?
Well, the first step is that I would want to understand what the problem is. So I would suggest that they do a waste characterization study so we can figure out which are the plastics that are problematic. Of course, if there are lots of plastics showing up in the waste and they're plastics that should be diverted through their recycling system, then it's a real question of looking up. And, Zero Waste Europe has a fantastic plan that gives you many steps to intensify recycling, user pay for garbage, and making garbage less attractive is certainly a key part of that. Deposit return should deal with a huge chunk of the plastics. There's not a lot beyond the bans that a local authority can do to limit how much plastic is coming into the local authority, but certainly working with the EPR program, making sure that the level of service is at the top that you can possibly get. Yeah, beyond what I've offered you, there's not much more, but I would suggest people go to your plan, and each and every step is going to make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are some clarification question for you, and one of them asked by Asli is related to the rise of other type of materials to replace still the single-use disposable use. For example, Adris is asking, how do you address this rising of new products on compostable biodegradables that are just replacing single-use plastics, and what should be our approach with that?
Yeah, I think it's one of the most important questions. I'm glad somebody has raised it. This is the big fear, that we're going to have these alternatives, and there's just only so many paper-based, biodegradable, natural products that you can use for certain packaging. And the big fear is that we're going to see bioplastics and biodegradable and compostable sort of being thrown into the marketplace in compliance with these bans. And I think that we all need to focus on absolute scientific rigor and support the Commission, because part of the plastic strategy was to clearly define what constitutes biodegradable, compostable, etc., and allow them to do their job, watch over them, engage the zero waste scientific community. And Enzo, this is a call out to you. This is critically important, and I would say not only for Europe, but I know that Hainan has just done a huge ban of non-biodegradable plastics, which is 8 million people in China, and they're happening all over the world. And it's really important that we keep a close eye on what could potentially be a setback if companies greenwash their way through by promoting biodegradable plastics, which aren't biodegradable. I mean, one quick example is the way the beverage industry has pushed their bioplastics. These are plastics that aren't made from oil, but they're made from biodegradable corn-based plastics and all these things, these plastics are not biodegradable. They are still, if you burn them, they still produce carbon. Carbon is carbon. Yes, they were made from a renewable resource, but we have to really focus on that piece and make sure that the definitions and the science, this is science-based stuff, and I have a lot of faith in the industry that they will innovate. And if they can't put something on the market and there's strict policies in place, then they will find a better alternative. And I think there will be a real opportunity for reuse as well in the future.
Thank you. There's a final question. I'm putting two questions together, actually link on the role of the industry. Vamsi is asking, is there any good examples where the snitch line has been like successfully implemented? I think there's this desire to also manage that part of the presentation that you made. And second one is actually for the companies who are not complying, are there any penalties, or how do we make sure that the industry does engage? You gave a very brief insight into that question.
Well, that's up to national authorities in terms of, because the legislation that Larissa gave to you, all of the obligation falls on the national authorities. So even though at the end of the day, the obligation is going to fall on the producers to pay and to not produce, not sell certain products, it's up to the member states to define those details in their national legislation. So they're going to have to carve out a penalty scheme that is going to kick in if there is a non-compliance. But ultimately, the non-compliance in the legislative framework at the EU puts the onus on member states, and there are financial implications if a member state doesn't meet the requirements of EU law. And the snitch line, I don't have any great examples off the top of my head, but it just seems to me like it's a good idea. I've heard of snitch lines being used for a variety of different purposes in the past, and I think it could get a lot of leverage. And I think it's a really, with social media today, I think it's an obvious way to go.
Thank you. I think we'll keep some time to talk about the bioplastics, because there's a few questions, and I think it's a topic that just keeps going over and over. So I'll keep that bit on the bioplastics for later conversation. Thank you very much, Larissa. We're moving now to our third panelist, to Janet Morat, who is the founder at Reusable. And Janet actually has been researching this reusable packaging solutions for the food and beverage industry for the past 8 years. And Janet has also a background in the hotel and tourism industry that most of the time, but most of us, is seen as one of the most problematic industry. So as the founder of Reusable, Janet will be explaining us this reusable system that was created, and I think it will answer some of the questions that we already have, and how do we do in practice, and what are the potential business solutions. So Janet, the floor is yours. Yes.
Can you see?
Yes, you just need to put it in full screen, and then,
okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Hello all together, and thanks for inviting me to speak on this webinar. I feel very honored. Thank you. So I just explain you quickly how our system works. I mean, the problem I don't have to explain, we all know. It's the packaging, and it's what's after coming out of the packaging, microplastic and everything. I just set my clock as well.
Janet, we just hear a lot of people speaking in the background. I don't know if it's possible.
Okay. Can you hear the people speaking in the background?
Yes, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just 1 second. Okay. So it's better now. As we said, we need a change. Everybody knows that, and that's why there is this new plastic legislation, and we find this is a really great idea to change something, to start to change something. Our solution is really easy. I mean, it's so easy that we are actually wondering why nobody has done it before. I don't know how about you, but we just put a deposit on the packaging and we give the packaging a value. So we have developed a box which is hygienic, which is very well washable, which is for 90% of the dishes. We sell this to the restaurants. The restaurants give it against the deposits. They sell it to their customers. And then they pay 10 francs, 10 euro on top of the menu, of the price of the meal they want to have. They eat, and then they can either wash it themselves and fill it up again, or they can just bring it back and it's washed in the restaurant and used again and again. We have started 2.5 years ago with about 20 restaurants. And now we have over 600 restaurants, almost 700 restaurants participating. And we are making quite of an impact right now already. I know we're just starting. And we start with the food, but it's a start and we get a lot of attention, like from customers and also from restaurants. It's just a change that's a bit difficult, so that's why it takes us so long. What's new? I mean, everybody can use his own Tupperware and go to a restaurant and let it be filled. It's not against the law, but nobody does it. And we were wondering why our system is working and the others don't. And we think that it's because we have kind of a branch solution. Like there is many restaurants that are participating and the box is very visible. It's an overall solution. We give the restaurants also communication. We give them information for their customers, and it's like the visibility is one of the keywords. It's a national network. Like all the restaurants that are participating, they are very well signed. Like they have a label, they have a beach flag, they have, like we invest a lot into communication. We have a customer service for our restaurants. If they have questions, if they want to need new products, new flyers, whatever, we are there, we listen to them. We try to keep the ways we try to keep the ways closed, like we produce in Switzerland, not in China or in India. If we do Recircle India, we will produce in India or China. So we try to keep it as local as possible. And the products have been specially designed for reuse. They're stackable, they're high quality, they are plastic that's long-lasting and not doesn't have migration. And we have made a hygiene concept, which we have been speaking to the veterinary offices of the big cities, and they agreed that we can work like that with the restaurants. We are not. We have a business model and a business plan. Because we need to redevelop this, and we cannot be a playing ball of governments that now it's green, maybe we get money, but if it's not green anymore, we don't get money. So we have to finance ourselves. And the business model is the way that nobody is like, no participating party is paying too much. Like the restaurant, if they work with us, they have even less cost because the throwaway, the single-use packaging is very expensive. The customer, he has it for free because he can give it back. And so everybody is winning. We have social entrepreneurship, like we have good conditions. We work with partnerships and not supplier-customer relations. We really want to build up a community of people who are reusing, and that's why we have made this change visible with this special color. We are constantly developing, and we guarantee the circular economy through recycling. And I think the secret is also that we have given packaging a value. This is how it looks like. This is a big restaurant chain who just started on Friday. It's a really big success for us. And we just communicate in a positive way. Like, we don't say you have to take this reusable, but people can choose. They can choose. And if it always starts very slowly in a restaurant, like 1 or 2 persons are taking the box, and then after a while there is more and more, and after a while it completely turns over. So we need the masses to really make a big change. The change is also that it's massively, like, it gets together the little efforts, all the little efforts together make a big effort. And right now we're eliminating about 20,000 single-use boxes a day. So that makes over 5 million a year with our small restaurant, with our little restaurants. So we have really a big impact here if we can make reusable systems like that more known. We also realized that it's an entrance for an ecological act in the everyday lives of the people, because if you start eating out of a reusable box, then you think about your next plastic bag if you're offered one. So that's kind of a nice thing as well. Also, another thing that goes with using a box is that you have less food waste because you eat the rest instead of throwing it away with your box. And that's also what Larissa said. So we can separate the organics because you can put the rest into the wet bin. Well, it's also, if you collect it, it's not very heavy, throwaway packaging, single-use packaging, but it's very voluminous, and it's putting like a lot of waste also on governments to clean up all these plastic bins and dust bins. And also we have tried to do, we have done lifecycle analysis, and depending on how many, on what single use you compare, the box is better from 7 uses to 15 uses than a single use. I have these things also, these diagrams also on our website, and it's easy to use. It's ready. You can just take it. You don't have to think about it. And here I'm at the end of my speech. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, thank you very much. And there's actually a lot of questions on the practical side, the implementation side. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm about this being one of the solutions to the plastic packaging issue. So there's a few questions on actually how it works in practice. Like, is it a pull system? If I get a box from one restaurant, can I use it somewhere else?
Yes.
Would be one of them. And I think it would be also interesting to mention where this thing is used today and how you work with the city actually to make it happen.
The second question I didn't understand acoustically. Well, I could just answer the first question now. Yes, it's a pool system. Like all the restaurants are. That's why we marked them with labels and with speech flags, so people know if it's a recycle restaurant, they can just bring it back there. You don't have to take it and give it back at the same restaurant. And if, for example, one restaurant has to take many boxes, we buy them back for the same price.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot of question about, how do you encourage? Because apparently, that's among our participants, there are a few people who are trying to convince the businesses to adopt a similar formula. So, what were the the key success factors that made you convince actually the restaurants to use it, and then likewise to convince consumers to use it?
Well, unfortunately, it's not really the ecological factor. It's the money factor, because the single use is very expensive. And for the restaurants, it's cheaper to wash a few bowls and to sell them to the customers. Actually, it's a money argument. And the customers, I mean, they have enough of so much garbage, and in Switzerland we pay for the garbage, so it's also a money thing again.
Yeah. So the financial dimension, both for the and with the city, how was your relationship with them, or how do they support you in that process?
We don't have many cities that really support us. We just talk directly to the restaurants. But if the cities support us, then they do campaigns like stop littering campaigns, or stop throwing away campaigns, because actually what we are doing is we are not selling only bowls. We are really trying to change the behavior from single use to reusable. And cities, they would be winners to push reusable systems, because we pay so much for garbage that has to be picked up from the cities. So I think for cities it would be very interesting to follow a reuse scheme like this.
Thank you. I see a lot of practical questions about how did you manage to respect the hygiene regulations. So the hygiene regulation is one of them. Some other questions are about, do you plan to expand in other places? And yeah, I think it's very much about how it worked a bit more in detail. But maybe what would be interesting is to understand, how it worked. Like, how did you implement it? And actually, is it possible to replicate Recircle in other places, in other continents, on other places in Europe?
Yes, it is. We are already starting to implement in Germany. There is a Recircle.de. We will start a test in France, in Montpellier, this summer, like this spring, in a few months. And in Europe, I think it's quite easy to take over our business model, and we also help. I saw some people I've already spoken to before in the chat, and we would love to help people to open up or do tests with Recircle. What you have to do is to find out the hygiene rules. For example, you have to find out, is it allowed to fill up? Is it allowed to share a bowl? Because it's kind of a bowl sharing, a box sharing. So you have to find out all these things, and then you can just start, because you don't need to redevelop all the containers. We have made a really good container, and it's like for 90% of the meals it's suitable.
Yep. And the very last question, I think there are some concerns about the use of a box that actually is a plastic one. And I think it's really good to come back to this thing of what type of plastics we are fighting against. And someone is asking, are they fully recyclable at the end of their life, these boxes? Did you consider the free radicals and polymers of your boxes? What are they made from? I think I'll take it as a final, very specific question before moving on to a broader conversation.
I've been thinking about this problem, or about this issue, for years. Of course, I would have loved to work with a more inert material, but it's just not possible, because glass has a memory, and you can use it you cannot use it over and over again if you heat it and let it be cold again, because one day it will explode, and not one day, quite soon. I know people in France who have made tests and are doing tests right now with even Pyrex, with this especially hard glass. This inox, like the aluminium, is not very much better than single use, and also it would be too expensive. It would be so expensive that nobody would buy it. You know, you cannot make a deposit that people can buy, and lots of people don't want to eat out of inox or metal, and you cannot put it in the microwave, and people want to reheat their lunches. So that's why we decided to do plastic, and we really were looking for a very good plastic. We add 30% of glass fiber, so it's really hydrolyze stable. It dries very quickly, and we guarantee the recycling of the boxes who come back to us, because right now we have like kind of a business model with our restaurants that they can renew the boxes, so we know they come back to us, and then we can recycle them with our producer. So we guarantee that.
Yeah.
Sorry, just one more thing. We cannot do boxes again right now, because it's against the law to use recycled material for food packaging. But we are working on that, and right now we're thinking about other ways to recycle it, but we have like about, I don't know, 15 kilos right now, so it's not worth to shred it and make new granules out of it.
Thank you very much. I think that's one point that would be interesting as a conclusion on the Reusable cases. Have you estimated the amount of waste that you have saved with the use of the box for now?
Yeah, it's since 2.5 years, it must be about, well, last year it was 5 million single-use packaging, and the year before was maybe 2.5. I haven't counted it the first year, because it was just launched. So right now we are at around 20,000, 25,000 a day single-use saved.
Thank you very much. Thanks for this deep dive in the case of Reusable, and for all the practical questions. I invite you to go on the website and see how the system functions, like a bit more in detail. For the last bit of our conversation, we have a full half an hour to go and actually have a better understanding how we can, based on your 3 presentations, can really put in place this plastic waste prevention. So I invite you to unmute your microphone. I have some broader questions. One of them is actually, so in our webinar, we have people from different backgrounds. We have people from the NGO, civil society, we have people from citizens, we have waste consultants, and we have local authorities. And one of the first questions we had earlier today is, what can an ordinary citizen do when it comes to pushing for the implementation of those directives? What is the power of a single citizen in making those changes happen? And I think I will actually go with the other players as well. What are the different roles that we can play to make sure that this change happen at the local level? So it's open to the 3 of you, if anyone has some input. And also, Janet, I invite you to stop sharing your screen so that we can see all the speakers. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I can try to answer that, but of course, I think citizens have play an important role on plastic waste prevention, especially starting by changing and rethinking their consumption patterns, and try to, see the sustainable alternatives that are already available. I know it's still not widely available. I know there's only some specific shops. There are some, alternatives, for instance, straws, the bamboo straws, metal ones. You don't find it everywhere, but there are still growing many shops and alternatives stores, also packaging free shops. I know that it's growing a lot in Europe. So give it a try, and because the less you go and consume, other plastic products, you raise the demand of these products. So, and of course you support the growth of other alternatives. So give it a try to the new these new systems such as Recircle and yeah.
I want to just say something about pooling systems that Jeanette so eloquently described. That's in the restaurant sector, but of course, pooling, I see a vision of a world where we have a lot more reusable packaging. And when I go to the grocery store, one of the things that frustrates me is coming home with single-use packaging, plastic or non-plastic, for eggs, for soft fruits like raspberries. You get these PET multi-layer, which makes them very difficult to recycle, packages that, let's just face it, right now, they're not getting recycled. And I think that the onus should very much be placed on the retailers. It's the retailers that have the power to collectively get together with other retailers, especially when we're talking about geographically, and work to pool packaging. It's happening with industrial packaging at a retail level. They share the same packaging. They're competing retailers, but they share, and you see them sometimes, reusable vegetable. When you buy your apples, they're in these bigger transportation crates that fold up, that get washed, they're pooled, they're barcoded. It's a very, very clean system. And I know that the transportation packaging poolers, the companies that are in the business of managing the asset, which is what Janet does at a consumer level, they really need to be pushed, and they need to be pushed by their customers to say, you've got to get on this bandwagon. I want to buy reusable packaging. I count on you. They need to realize that they can gain a competitive edge because people will want to shop at that shop. And I think that the consumers have to voice their opinion to the retailers. And we're already doing it because we're saying, we don't want plastic. We want a plastic-free aisle. We want paper bags. We don't want plastic bags. But we need to take it a step further and really talk about a fundamental shift in consumer-based packaging that is reusable, high quality, well-designed, like the bowl, good plastics. I do think that soon we're going to be able to use more recycled content in food-grade packaging. I think it's just a matter of the standard setting organization catching up with the science. I think the Commission has made that a priority. So I really see a big future in the reusables, and we need to push the retailers. We need to get them to realize that it's sexy, and eco is sexy, and reuse is sexy, and these containers can be sexy. I would much prefer to eat a salad out of Jeanette's salad bowl than those stupid clear multi-layer PET, because it's a nice design. It makes sense. And that's where we need to start thinking, is getting the retailers and getting the designers to come up with the sexy, cool packaging that consumers will want to buy. That's my input.
Thank you. Janet, do you want to add something? I was seeing you nodding.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I think it's the foot into the door, because it's quite easy to replace food packaging, because you speak directly with the customer and also directly with one restaurant. So it's not a big delivery chain in between. So that's quite easy, but it's a first step in. And I have a vision of a world where everything is reusable and pooling, because you can do everything. You just need to rethink things. And like first when I started, people were laughing at me. They were saying, what, do you want to do a business out of this? And now I have 4 employees, it's working, but you need to really rethink things. And also what's really important, especially for us who are very into this theme, is that we never really tell people what to do. We just give them an opportunity to choose themselves. If we tell them they have to take a box, they will never take it. And so we have to be red color, not green, sexy, not like you have to, and otherwise the world will fail or something. You really have to have a joyful communication that people want to use reusable systems or something more ecological.
Can I just pick up one thing that struck me is working with the pooling companies, the big ones that pool transportation packaging. They always tell me that when a retailer switches to reusable transport packaging, they never go back. And Janet, you said the same thing. Once the retailers get used to it and they start doing it, they love it. And I think that's the amazing thing about it. I've heard it now twice, that we just got to get them on it and then they'll stick with it because it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense financially as a starting point, not even taking into consideration the environmental impacts.
Yes, which actually connects what we said before. So the policy framework is there as Larissa presented it, but you actually need to keep the pressure for good implementation, but also to go beyond. So with citizens that keep saying out loud that they don't want this way to consume the products anymore, it's actually create the right incentive for the businesses, social businesses like Recircle, to create solutions, but also for the more traditional industry. I wanted to hear maybe from you, Clarissa, so there's a lot of things going on with plastic waste and the plastic industry or the traditional producers. What is the reaction? What do you hear, or what is the energy, the sense that you get these days? Because I think there's a lot of concern about the fact that this is all going to fade away without big change. But what's your feeling?
So, because I'm talking to a more of a public and an NGO audience, I can tell you that I deal a lot with the plastics industry and the value chain, and they are really, I would say, as a total industry group, shocked out of their wits that this has happened to them, and it's happened so quickly. As the industry, I think that they thought that they could lobby their way out of it, but they just started too late because it happened so quickly that by the time they started aggressive lobbying, it was already in the negotiation. So I think that they were caught a bit off guard, and you could argue that they shouldn't have been, because this has been so obviously coming. But the plastics industry has gone, it's been a pretty good ride for a long time, and having China there for all those years, 15 years, just sucking up all this shit plastic that was badly sorted, shipping it to China. This China ban is forcing us to all take a look at this problem. So the industry is caught off guard, and within the industry, I think what's happening now is that we're starting to see that industry block, which are usually represented by associations of companies, starting to fragment, because there are some leaders, some companies within those plastics virgin producers, beverage producers, that are saying, this can't continue. And if I'm going to be successful in the business I'm in, I've got to take the higher road. If I'm a plastics producer, I have to focus on recovering as much plastic out of the waste stream, not oil out of the ground, and turning that into a reliable recycled resin that's food grade that my customers like Unilever and P&G can rely on. That's a really important piece. And those are the companies that will land on top. In the same way, retailers that offer alternative packaging, pooled systems, I believe they're going to end up on top. So what you have now is an industry in shock, and I call them the knuckle draggers, the old boys, the dinosaurs that are they work in a world of lobbying and that's all they know, are suddenly realizing that something has to change, that the text is not going to change. It's going through, it's done, it's not changing. So I think the opportunity for us is to try to engage with those that are looking at more optimum systems and work very closely with them. In the deposit issue alone, there are some very leading edge companies like Matoni out of the Slovak countries, like Slovakia, Czech Republic, that are really pushing for deposits. They're lobbying their government to introduce good legislation for deposits, which is odd because the government doesn't really want to do it. So these are the companies. We have to find who are the winners, the real guys that want to change, guys and girls that want to change. We have to work with them, and we have to support their efforts, even if they are the traditional big bad industry, because I think we just got to get a couple of really big ones to help make that switch, and then we'll have that tipping point.
Thank you very much, Emma. I'm moving to a point that is also kind of linked to the industry reaction to plastic. So we briefly touched base on the bioplastic question, and I know Larissa wanted to mention something linked to the legislation. Just to go back, at some point, one of the participants asked, okay, what do we do when actually people just want to replace the traditional single-use plastic with bioplastics? We have an answer for this, but I would like also that we address not only the bioplastic, but just the temptation to replace single-use plastic items with any other type of material, and how do we actually make sure that this doesn't happen? Larissa first on the bioplastic and the directive.
Hi, I think maybe I didn't highlight that, but biodegradable plastics are included in the scope of the directive. So they cannot just switch to biodegradable items. That's not gonna reach the targets and the objectives of the directive. They're gonna still fail. So the focus is really to switch for reusable alternatives. Including directive also includes paper cups or these things, paper with plastic lining. It's also included. And also, for instance, when I said that the member states can go beyond, for instance, on the consumption reduction targets for food containers and cups, they can ban the items, but they cannot ban to favor biodegradable ones. They can only ban if reusable ones are or another alternatives are put in place. So just to make sure biodegradable plastics are included in the directive, because they can contribute to the marine pollution at the same level as other plastics.
Thank you. And then coming to the second point of how do we make sure that, so that the deposit systems that presented Janet and the one that mentioned Clarissa are actually what exactly we're looking for, but what is the risk of other items that beyond the directive to be just replaced by other type of materials? Do you have any insight into this, or any strategy possible for people who are actively engaging at the local level to change from single-use plastics to reusable?
I think it's really to ensure that the focus is switching to reusables and not single use to another single use, because it doesn't make sense. The strategy is to keep the valuable materials in the chain, the product chain. It's not to just produce something and throw away. We're gonna just switch the impact to another source of material, for if you switch for papers, for instance, and it doesn't make sense. And that should be the focus on the national implementation as well, to not go for any other single-use materials.
Well, I'm going to have a slight disagreement with you there. I mean, I agree in principle, but there is an issue with food contact right now, and Jeanette mentioned it as well. I mean, right now we're kind of limited to PET. So, I mean, I think that we're going to get there, but right now there definitely is an issue with reusables for certain food content. So in this regard, we need to actually focus on improving our collection systems. And this is where we need to, in some cases, rethink how we collect. And, a rule of thumb is, everything is recyclable, basically. Most plastics are recyclable. 60% of the plastics are polyolefin, and they're highly recyclable. 15% are PET. Most of it is recyclable. We need to bring it in a state and a quality that is good from the get-go. So how we collect things is really important. And we've gone down a bad path, which some jurisdictions more than others, and I'm thinking of the UK and America and Canada, where we tend to collect everything together, mixed together. And, in a lot of countries outside of Europe, we mix the glass with the plastics and everything gets crushed together. And it's virtually impossible to sort that stuff out in an economically feasible way. So in some cases where we don't have alternatives, or for whatever reason we can't get those alternatives operating in those countries, we need to find solutions to recover those single-use plastics that are not banned and make sure that they get fully recyclable. I mean, fully recycled. Plastics have a high demand. This isn't the problem. they want the polyolefins back, but they want them in a reasonable quality. And that stems from how we collect. And I think I heard Enzo talk about bespoke systems where we really need to look at what's the jurisdiction and what's the best method for collecting the material in the best way possible. And those are the sorts of solutions, because this notion of putting it all in a bin and crushing it and making the most out of collection efficiency did not prove to be successful at all. And it's being shown now that China has said, we don't want your garbage anymore.
Thank you very much. I think we discussed quite a lot about the plastic waste in the frame of the new directive, which is actually on all the items that Larissa presented. And there are some questions about the other use of plastics that are also challenged. So I don't know if any of you would have some insight in, for example, the construction and demolition waste. Part of it is also plastics. Do we intend in the future to also have legislations on this? Or for the medical waste as well, someone is asking about in laboratories and research places, we also have this type of single-use use of plastic. So what is actually the vision for the plastic waste prevention in the future? How do we engage or address this other use in other industries and sectors? I don't know if any of you have some insight into this.
Well, I'll just say one thing. There is an opportunity, recycled content legislation, which we feel is really, really important in terms of being legislated, not voluntarily adopted as a company, because if you make a commitment to buy recycled content, it's a very effective way of reducing the carbon footprint of that unit, functional unit of whatever it is, piping, PVC piping, or whatever. And the key to that is that there are some pieces of legislation right now, like the Construction Products Directive, the Automotive End-of-Life Vehicles Directive, where there's an opportunity to insert recycled content mandates. We've been pushing for that. This is something the Commission's going to be reviewing over the next few years. And that would, again, if there's this impetus to have to find recycled content to put into your construction products or your car bumpers, again, it speaks to finding better collection systems upstream to source those materials so that you can circle them through that circular loop once again. So I think there's some opportunity, legislatively speaking, in those directives.
Thank you very much. We're getting closer to the end, and I'm sorry, there are a lot of questions that addresses many dimensions of plastic waste, and I think that just shows the intricacies of this challenge. So we have questions on the fish industry, the fish markets, about the first world countries and how to engage. I think one of the intention with such a webinar is just to explain overall what's the framework today and what is happening, and also give some insight into what could be done by you, whatever your profile is. So maybe as a conclusion, thoughts from each of you, I would like maybe to hear what is in a way the hope that you have and the evolution that you see, like the development that you see. Some of you already mentioned that this is what you see in the future. What would be your hope linked to this plastic waste? It seems clear today that hearing what Clarissa was saying about the industry, hearing the potential of development of Recircle or the existing directive mentioned by Larissa, that there's some sort of momentum in fighting this plastic pollution at source. So in a way, with your different profile and angles, what is the development that you see and the hope that you could share with us to close this webinar? I'll start probably with Larissa, then Clarissa, and Janet.
So what I see, as I said, this directive was a big first step, and I highlight and I emphasize the first step. I know it's really ambitious, but I think there's a lot of things, still to do to cut plastic at source. I agree that reusable alternatives cannot be implemented for everything, and there's also this issue on food contact materials. And then for this, these items has to be worked on the recyclability, on the collection, separate collection. So everything has to be implemented, working towards the waste hierarchy. I mean, prevention, and then, you know, all the sources of waste on the waste management, all the steps on the waste management have to be thought. So, and I think it's really important to replicate the good, the alternatives available. For instance, the recycle business. So business and governments and cities and communities can be inspired and replicate all these actions to tackle plastic waste at source. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you, Larissa. Clarissa, you're muted.
Sorry. I think as we move on, we have to recognize that this is a national, right now the onus is on national governments. They have 2 years, and we need to really focus on that national. I mean, I'm always focused on national legislation because I think it's critically important. And as much as I feel that the public has a role to play, as they always do, I don't know if it's the place where the experts in the room, which is you guys, need to focus our efforts. I think we need to sit down as much as we can with national governments, show them that there are solutions, and work with them on introducing those solutions. And I think one of the most important things is introducing the national governments to the industry and bringing in these leading edge companies like Jeanette's company and saying, hey, these guys are doing it and it's working, so you should consider doing it as well. And the final thing that I would say is we need to link circular economy to climate change. There is so much happening from a policy perspective on climate change. And until we really link with those climate change bureaus at different governments and show them the connections, only at that point will we start to see circular economy policy taking a priority in those circular economist climate change policy actions.
Thank you much, Clarissa. Janet?
Okay, I see it more from a side of the company side, like small and middle companies, that we just should stop thinking about things and just doing things. Like you can do a test easily with one little thing, and many little things will be a big thing. So we have to stop making concepts. We just have to try, do something. And I feel this mentality right now a lot in Switzerland, and I hope it's everywhere else like this. Like I can feel it in France and in Germany because I speak with them. And I think this is also a very good way to do, is just do something. It's a very good way to change things.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the three of you. We're at the end of our webinars. There were today more or less 70 people who were plus 10 that were who joined us for this webinar. Thank you very much, the three of you, for giving us some insight in the policy side, the implementation, the next steps, and the business opportunities and the role of the industry. Our next webinar is going to be the 16th of April, and we will talk about another really hot topic, that is a strategy, the transition strategy to deal with residuals. And of course, part of them are going to be non-recyclable plastic, so everything is quite linked up. I wanted to mention for people who've been in northern Germany or closer to that place, this end of the month we are having a Zero Waste Cities conference in Kiel, Germany, and you are all very much welcome to join. We'll be talking about how to implement zero waste strategies, and we have a full panel on precisely going upstream on the zero waste hierarchy and rethinking and redesigning the product as well. So very last point, make sure that you sign up to the Zero Waste Cities newsletter. This is where we put all the information on the webinars, and all of our activities. So again, thank you very much. Thanks for all speakers, your questions. And again, sorry, we cannot really answer all of them. So everything will be shared after this webinar. And again, thank you. And we hope to see great results when it comes to plastic waste prevention, many different places in different areas. Thank you. Have a nice afternoon.